Years before entire populations were confined to their homes, governments were already rehearsing the scenario. Not hypothetically, not casually, formally, on paper, in simulation rooms, with timelines, compliance models, enforcement strategies, and communication plans. They called them exercises, tabletop scenarios, preparedness drills, contingency planning. Most people never heard about them. Those who did were told they were routine, boring, purely precautionary. The kind of thing bureaucracies do just in case. But when you go back and actually read the documents, something feels off. Because these weren't vague disaster outlines. They were detailed rehearsals for mass restriction of movement, economic shutdowns, population-wide behavioral compliance, and centralized control of information. And they happened years in advance. One of the most striking patterns is how similar these exercises were across different countries and institutions. Different names, different logos, same assumptions. Large-scale emergency, unclear threat, urgent need for unified messaging, civil liberties temporarily suspended, movement limited, dissent framed as risk, compliance framed as virtue, and temporary measures, always temporary. But when real-world events later unfolded, governments didn't hesitate. They didn't debate frameworks. They didn't scramble for ideas. They reached for binders that already existed. The language was already written. The thresholds were already defined. The justifications were already tested. This raises an uncomfortable question. If these scenarios were only theoretical, why were they so operational? Why did they include enforcement mechanisms rather than just medical or humanitarian responses? Why did they prioritize communication control alongside physical restriction? And why did so many governments respond in near lockstep, despite vastly different cultures, legal systems, and risk profiles? Preparedness explains some of it, but not all. Because preparedness doesn't usually involve rehearsing how to suspend normal life indefinitely. Many of these simulations explicitly modeled public fatigue, non-compliance, protest, economic fallout, psychological strain. In other words, they weren't just planning for a crisis, they were planning for resistance to the response. That's a crucial distinction. Emergency planning typically focuses on logistics, supplies, infrastructure, response time. These exercises focused on behavior. How long would people tolerate restrictions? What messaging would maintain compliance? At what point would enforcement need to escalate? Which groups would resist first? How to counter misinformation? That word appears again and again, not as a side concern, as a central threat. Because in these models, uncontrolled narratives were as dangerous as the emergency itself. This reframes what preparedness really meant. It wasn't just about protecting people from harm. It was about managing populations during uncertainty. That management required trust, fear, repetition, and authority. And it had to be practiced. When real events later arrived, officials repeatedly said the same thing. No one could have predicted this, but the documents say otherwise. They predicted it in structure, if not in exact details. They anticipated mass compliance through emergency framing. They anticipated resistance being morally delegitimized. They anticipated the need for coordination between governments, corporations, and media. They anticipated long durations, not short disruptions. And perhaps most telling, they anticipated that once normal life was paused, restarting it would be complicated. Because when systems change under emergency conditions, they rarely revert cleanly. Temporary measures linger. Exceptions become precedents. What was once unthinkable becomes thinkable, then acceptable, then normal. This is why the word temporary matters so much. It's the bridge between consent and permanence. You accept something you would otherwise reject because you believe it will end. But history shows that emergency powers are almost never fully relinquished. They are modified, renamed, embedded. The drills knew this. Many simulations explicitly addressed the problem of returning to normal. They didn't assume it would be automatic. They treated it as a political and psychological challenge. How do you convince people to re-enter society after teaching them that proximity is danger? How do you restore freedoms after redefining them as risks? How do you undo fear once it has been institutionalized? These questions were asked quietly, long before they were asked publicly. And that's why this matters now. Because once a population has lived through a full-scale rehearsal turned reality, the threshold for repetition drops. The precedent is set. The language is familiar. The resistance is weaker. The next time doesn't need to be justified from scratch. It just needs a trigger. This is what permanent preparedness looks like. A society always one declaration away from suspension of normal life. Always ready, always on edge, always deferring autonomy to authority just in case. The drills didn't end, they evolved. They expanded into new domains: climate, cyber, health, infrastructure, information, different threat, same response architecture, emergency framing, central coordination, restricted movement, controlled narratives. And each time the public is told this is unprecedented. But the pattern says otherwise. Preparedness was never about a single event. It was about building a repeatable model for governing through crisis, a model that bypasses debate, accelerates compliance, and reshapes norms under pressure. Once you see that, the question changes. It's no longer why did they respond this way? It's why were they preparing this response long before anyone knew what would trigger it? And more importantly, if the drills were practice, what comes next? You be the judge. If you're awake, you already know what to do. Hit the link in our description and sign up to our free underground newsletter.